capital markets are nothing but the market where we can raise the finance for the companies. The rate of interest which you will be paying on the funds which you have borrowed, that will denote the cost of the funds. Control of the entire company can be taken up by the new equity shareholders who have purchased our shares. Whatever the stock exchange they have listed companies, only those company shares can be purchased with the help of this ADRs. Hello everyone, I am Purnima, faculty in the Department of Commerce, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Temple of Excellence, Mysuru. In this session 5 on the sources of business finance, I will be having a discussion on the various sources of international financing. Now, let us look into what is the meaning of the word international financing. So, international financing, so let us see what it tells us. So, in addition to the sources discussed above, there are various avenues for organizations to raise funds internationally. So, in the previous sessions, I had discussed about the various sources of funds available for the business community. So, it may be the commercial banks, or it may be the financial institutions, or the trade credits, etc. There are various sources of finance for the business community. So, in addition to all these sources, there are many other international sources which are offering loans to the business community. So, with the opening up of the economy and the operations of the business organizations becoming global, Indian companies have access to funds in the global capital market. So, various international sources from where funds can be generated. So, in addition to this, so Indian economy has been opening up globally. So, we have a global economy nowadays. Why? Because of the MNCs. So, the MNCs are there all over the world. So, they have the branches all over the world. So, with the opening up of the Indian economy or the business community has access to almost all the international financial institutions. So, they are providing loans for the business community in India. Now, let us see what are the various sources of international financing. Now, we have the commercial banks. So, what we have already studied about the commercial banks in India. So, we know how the commercial banks in India work, because they all come under the governmental control, and almost all are nationalized banks, and they have to follow the rigid rules which are made by the government. Now, this commercial bank refers to those foreign banks which are there all over the world. Now, this is one of the main source of international finance. So, commercial banks all over the world extend foreign currency loans for business purposes. They are an important source for financing non-trade international operations. So, these commercial banks, they offer lot of loans to the business community. For example, we have the HSBC Bank. Now, the type of loans provided by the banks vary from country to country. For example, the Standard Chartered Bank emerged as a major source of foreign currency loans to the Indian industry. So, we have the Standard Chartered Bank, which was the first bank to offer loans to the Indian community. Then, the next important source of international financing is the international agencies and development banks. Now, we know that there are a lot of international agencies which have been set up for the business community. We have the international financial corporations, we have the International Monetary Fund, we have the World Bank. So, there are so many banks which are there, which are providing loans for the business community in other countries. So, let us have a look into what this tells us. So, number of international agencies and development banks have emerged over the years to finance international trade and business. Now, what are they doing? So, these bodies provide long, medium-term loans and grants to promote the development of economically backward areas in the world, especially the developing nations. So, we always say that India is a developing country. So, why we say that? Because we can see that we are still struggling to become developed nation. So in order to see that these developing nations get developed, these international financing, they are helping the business community for the development of the economically backward areas in the world. So they were set up by the governments of the developed countries of the world at national, regional and international levels for funding various projects. So they have various projects to be funded. So with the help of this, they are trying to create a better world for all of us. For example, WHO, it is an organization which is, you must have heard of WHO, WHO, that is the World Health Organization, which has so many projects in almost all the developing nations. So this WHO is almost participating there in making so many projects in the developing nations for the benefit of the health of the people in the economically backward areas. Now, the next source of finance is the international capital markets. Now, we know that what are capital markets? So, capital markets are nothing but the market where we can raise the finance for the companies. So, for the joint stock companies, you can raise through the shares or you can raise it through the issue of debentures. So, we call this as a capital market. Now, let us see what is the term international capital market mean. So, modern organization including multinational companies depend upon sizable borrowings in rupees as well as in foreign currencies. So, any business for that matter, it needs lot of loans, and these loans can be in Indian currency or in foreign currency. So, some of the financial instruments used for this purpose are the global depository receipts. So, what do we mean by the global depository receipts? GDRs. So, what do we mean by GDR? It is nothing but global depository receipts. So, whenever the local company shares are issued, these company shares will be deposited with the depository. Now, when the shares are deposited with the depository will issue a receipt, or this receipt are called as the global depository receipts. So, these GDRs, what we call, so they are transferable. So, they are transferable easily, or just like a negotiable instrument which can be easily converted into shares of any company. So, in the Indian context, if you can look into what are GDRs, so these GDRs are issued by the Indian companies abroad. So, whenever the Indian company's name is listed in a stock exchange in a foreign country, then they will be issuing this GDRs. So, with the help of these GDRs, you can always purchase the shares of the Indian companies. So, one of the most famous companies which have raised funds abroad are the Infosys, and we also have the Wipro company which has raised funds abroad in the foreign exchanges situated abroad. So, these global depository receipts, they are nothing but they are financial instruments which can be easily converted into shares. Now, when you have this GDR, you can easily purchase the shares of any Indian company, but then the holders of these GDRs, they will not have any voting rights, but they will be entitled to a dividend on their holdings only, and then they can always have a appreciation of their capital. In addition to that, they will not have any other voting rights. So, this is the meaning of the word GDR, or the global depository receipts. Now, the next source of finance is the American depository receipts. Now, American depository receipts is just similar to the global depository receipts. Now, in the American depository receipts, so the American companies or the companies which are based in US, they will be issuing this American depository receipts, and they can buy the shares of the American companies which are listed in America only. So, in the US, whatever the stock exchange they have listed companies, only those company shares can be purchased with the help of this ADRs. So this will be in dollars only, and anybody who is an American citizen, he can purchase the shares of an American company with the help of ADR, or the American Depository Receipts. Now, next we have the Indian Depository Receipts. Now, what do we mean by Indian Depository Receipts? So, these receipts are issued by the Indian companies. So, whenever a foreign company wants to buy shares of an Indian company in India, then they can do so with the help of this IDRs, or the Indian Depository Receipts. So, with the help of these Indian Depository Receipts, they can purchase the shares of Indian companies which are situated in India, and in this way they will be able to raise the fund. The next one is foreign currency convertible bonds. So these foreign currency convertible bonds, they are nothing but the debt instruments. They are similar to the debentures which are issued in India. So this foreign currency convertible bonds, they can be purchased in any foreign currency, and they will be given a fixed rate of interest. Just like when you purchase a debenture, you will be entitled to a fixed rate of interest. You will be entitled to a fixed rate of interest on this foreign currency convertible bonds. So just like the debentures which can be converted into equity shares, these FCCBs also can be converted into equity shares. So these are equity linked bonds, and they can be easily converted into equity shares after a certain period of time, and they are entitled to a rate of interest just like a debentures. So these FCCBs are very similar to the debentures which are issued in India. Then next, let us have a look into what are the various factors affecting the choice of the source of funds. Now, the first factor is the cost of the funds. Now, what do we mean by the cost of the funds? By the cost of the funds, we mean what is the rate of interest we are paying in order to raise the funds. Suppose you are borrowing from a bank, then you will be having a low rate of interest. But if you are borrowing from a private party, then you will have to pay a heavy rate of interest. So, the rate of interest which you will be paying on the funds which you have borrowed, that will denote the cost of the funds. So, in this, the first thing, whenever we want to raise a fund, so the cost will become the most important factor, the source. Let us have a look into the, what do we mean by cost? So, cost represents two items. The first one is the cost of the procurement of funds. Next one is the cost of utilization of funds. So, both these factors should be taken into consideration when we decide about the sources of funds. Now, the next important aspect to be considered is the financial strength and stability of operations. So, whenever a business unit or a business community wants to raise finances, then it should be financially stable, in the sense that it should have a stability in business. That is, it should have a stable earnings. So, if the earnings are stable, or if business earnings are not stable, then it will not be in a position to repay its loans, which will affect the goodwill of the company. So, whenever we see that if the business community wants to raise funds, then first it should look at the financial strength and how stable its operations are. Otherwise, the business will fail. Then the third factor which affects the business community is form of organization. So, in this form of organization, we should understand that whether it is a partnership form of organization, whether it is a sole trading concern, or if it is a joint stock company. So, if it is a joint stock company, it will be better for the company to raise loans with the issue of equity shares or preference shares. But then if it is a partnership firm, it cannot raise funds through equity shares or other preference shares. So, it has to rely on the money which is gotten by the partners. Next one is the purpose and time period. Now, what do we mean by purpose and time period? So, for what purpose the business is borrowing the funds? And second one is, what is the time period for which it needs the funds? So, this becomes very, very important. So, if the business requires funds for a very short period, then it is better to go in for a bank loan, which will offer the loan and it can be repaid in easy installments. But if it is for a long-term fund, then it is better for the business community to go in for equity shares or preference shares, because equity shares will not come with the burden of paying interest. But then if you are borrowing loans from a bank or any other financial institution, then we will have to pay interest on those loans, etc. So which will be an added burden to the company. So as such, so depending on the type of loan, we have to decide the source of finance. So if it is for a long-term period, it will be better for the business community to go in for a issue of shares or debentures. Now, the next aspect, what do we mean by risk profile? So, this is one of the most important aspect to be considered. So, whenever the business borrows funds from any other institution, there is an obligation to repay the money as well as pay the interest regularly. So, both these aspects have to be looked into. So, whenever there is a risk regarding this, it is better for the business community to raise loans through the issue of equity shares or preference shares, because it does not come with the burden of paying the repayment amount and also the interest on the money collected. Then the next important factor is control. Now, what do we mean by control? Suppose a company issues more and more equity shares whenever it wants finances. What will happen is the equity shareholders will have voting rights, as a result of which the management of the company or the control of the entire company can be taken up by the new equity shareholders who have purchased our shares. So, in order to see that there is no dilution of control of management, it is better for the business community to issue debentures or preference shares. So, if it does not want to lose the control over the company. Then, next one is effect on credit worthiness. Now, what do we mean by credit worthiness? So, credit worthiness means the ability of the business to repay its loans regularly. How prompt it is in payment of loans and how prompt it is in payment of interest. So, whenever the business is borrowing on credit, it has to see that it does not affect its credit worthiness, or it is making its payments all very, very promptly. Then next one is flexibility and ease. Now, what do we mean by flexibility and ease? So, in this flexibility and ease, we should understand that whenever the business is borrowing funds from any other institution, there should not be in too many procedures and there should not be so many provisions or restrictions on the use of funds or in the activities of the business. So, we have seen sometimes the commercial banks, they lay down too many restrictions on the activities of the business. So, right from declaration of dividend and even for the use of funds also, it will have so many restrictions which will just hamper the activities of the business, and all this should be looked into when we decide about the sources of funds. The last factor affecting the sources of funds is tax benefits. So, we should borrow from those sources where the company will get tax benefits. For example, if the company borrows on the basis of debentures, then the debenture interest is deductible from the taxable profits. Or if the company is borrowing from a bank, the interest paid on the loan is also deductible. So, considering the tax benefits also, the company can decide on source of funds it needs. Hope you have all understood this session on sources of business finance. Thank you.